Hey, what's going on, guys? Swiss Maverick here with the third tutorial of the series. In this video I'm going to focus on mission editing. As announced in the previous two videos, I'm just going to go over the very basics of mission editing because there is not a lot of information available online. It's really hard to find some, and quite frankly I don't have time to spend hours or even weeks on learning things myself. I'm going to show you some of the very basic features which are, in my opinion, somewhat important to actually use Zeus in a mission that you want to be completely generated via Zeus, or just use Zeus as a tool in a mission that you have created in the editor with scripts and everything you're probably used to. In the very first video I already showed you how to set up Zeus basically in God mode, where you have access to pretty much all its features, therefore can create the mission on the fly without any restrictions or having to worry about limited resources and whatnot. This is also how I personally use Zeus when I create missions for my community. It's also how we run it on our public server. When using Zeus on an open server though, it's really important to restrict access, because otherwise everyone is able to use those tools, those features, and can pretty much mess up your server. Alright, I'm going to go to the mission editor now and show you some of the very basic features. In the first chapter I'm going to show you how to enable Zeus for a player who's going to be able to toggle in and out of the Zeus interface at any time during the mission, or the game logic version where a special Zeus slot is created. The player version is what I've shown you in the first video and used in the second one. This is where you create an infantry unit which is selected as playable and therefore become a player slot in the multiplayer mission lobby. Here again it's important to name the unit, as example here Zeus, and then use that exact name when defining the owner in the Zeus module. Also important here is to disable the force interface option in the Game Master module. Otherwise you will not be able to toggle in and out of the Zeus interface, which defeats the whole purpose of this version where you have a playable slot. Writing next to the name of the unit in the editor also a description will help you identify the proper slot here in the multiplayer mission lobby. Since we have not added any special restrictions, which will be covered later in the video, anyone who's going to join that Zeus slot will have access to Zeus. It's not restricted to a specific person or the server admin or anything. Therefore, this way to use Zeus is easy and well suited for community operations or just a game with your friends, because there you can decide who's going to be Zeus. There's not going to be a discussion about it. But for a public server where you do not always have control who's online and who's going to be in that slot, it's not suited at all. As you can see in the footage right now, I do have access to Zeus from that slot. I have full God mode enabled, meaning all the features I can create stuff for all the factions. But the player slots and everything pre-created in the editor will not be editable via Zeus. To do that, I will have to use a special module, which I'm going to show you later. The alternative version to enable Zeus for a specific slot is the game logic version. Here, whoever is using Zeus is always in the Zeus interface and is not represented by a virtual character in the mission. I guess this is well suited if you plan on doing a full-scale Zeus mission where everything is created on the fly and you don't want to have a virtual unit standing around somewhere being vulnerable to enemies. Setting this up in the mission editor works very similar, but instead of having a unit selected as playable, you just use a game logic. You will have to create a player first though, otherwise the category game logic will not become available. Once that is done, select game logic and then Zeus. Here you get Zeus like the general one, blue for op for independent and civilian. I'm just going to go with the normal one for full access and make that playable. Again, important is the name to define the owner afterwards in the Game Master module. I'm just going to name this Zeus GM, so Game Master. And okay, nope, that doesn't work. I cannot have a space in the name, so I'm going to use an underline there. It should be good. And in the description to identify the slot, I'm going to write something Zeus GM. Now I'm going to open the Game Master module. I'm going to change the owner here to Zeus _GM, because that's the name of the game logic. And now really important here is to set the force interface window to enabled. So this way the game logic will always be forced to use the Zeus interface, which is exactly what we want. Now I just have to ungroup it and then sync it with the Game Master module, and I'm good to go. I'm going to delete the player from before. I only created that to enable the game logic category, but it's no longer required. In the multiplayer mission lobby now, the 5th player slot, which was designed as Zeus, is no longer available, but instead you do have next to the blue for faction an extra faction, if you will, and this is the Zeus logo, and here we have our player slot for the game logic version. When I choose that slot and start the mission, I will instantly start in the Zeus user interface, as you're already familiar with it. As you can see, we still have those 4 units, the 4 units I created in the editor, which are the other available slots. If actual human players would have joined that slot, you would see them moving around by now. But more important is that whoever is in the Zeus slot is no longer represented with a virtual unit in the mission. So those are the two ways of setting up Zeus in full God mode. The first one, where you as player have access to a character and can toggle into Zeus at any time, and the game logic version where the user interface is always forced. As previously mentioned, restricting access to the Zeus UI on a public server is really important, because an irresponsible public player with that kind of power can pretty much mess up your server. And don't worry, by messing up the server I don't actually mean the actual server, the installation or anything like that, but he can mess up the mission completely, which will require a restart, and that pisses off all the players. Apparently there's supposed to be multiple ways to restrict the access, but quite frankly I only found one that is actually working for me. The first one I've already showed you multiple times now, which is setting a variable name for an object, or in that case a playable slot. That does work in the way that only one particular slot has access to the Zeus UI, but again it does not prevent public players from actually picking that slot in the multiplayer lobby. The best way in my opinion to restrict access to the Zeus UI on a public server is via UID, user identification. It is a unique number of about 16 digits if I'm not mistaken, tied to one particular copy of ARMA3, and it's a unique number in the entire world. So everyone who has bought the game legally has a unique player UID which can be used to identify his game. Do not confuse this number with the actual CD key for the game or anything like that, the Steam unlock key. It has nothing to do with that, it's just a unique number to identify the players. It can be used in this example to restrict access to Zeus. It is also used for squad XMLs and similar things. You do not have to worry about sharing this number with other people. So even if a hacker gets that number, he cannot do anything with it. It's not the CD key or the registry key. So to restrict access to Zeus, you just copy that unique player ID into the owner box of the Game Master module, and only the player with that particular number will be able to access Zeus in that mission. Therefore, it's no longer required to specify a specific slot with Zeus access, because the predefined player can pick whatever slot he wants and still have access to Zeus if he owns the permissions via user ID in the Game Master module. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be possible to add multiple user IDs to one Game Master module, which means you will have to create multiple Game Master modules with just one user ID each. That works fine to restrict access to, let's say, just 3 people, like the 3 server admins or anything like that. Important to know though is that when using this version for multiple people, all of them will have access to their own Zeus, if you will, meaning they can create content and interact with that, but not with content another Zeus has created. When I'm in the multiplayer mission lobby now, I can pick whatever slot I want, as said before. I don't have to use a particular slot. Because I was defined as the owner of the Game Master module via user ID, I will always have access no matter what slot I'm in. The last variants to restrict access to Zeus will be #admin voted, #admin locked would be the best way to do it, but personally I've not found out how it works on a dedicated server. Quite frankly, I'm not sure if it even does work. So to sum it up, in my opinion, the best way to grant access to Zeus in a closed session, meaning a community operation or a game with friends, is using the variable name and lock access to a specific slot. But for a dedicated public server where you don't really have control who's gonna be in that particular slot, it might be better to restrict access to 2, maybe 3 people via user ID. For more advanced mission editing with Zeus, you will have to use the editor modules. You can find them under F7 modules and then category Zeus. There are a lot of different modules which can be or have to be used for certain features or mainly restrictions. Personally, I don't use them because I consider myself to be a reasonable Zeus, meaning I want to use my powers and therefore make the mission not enjoyable for the players. But again, on the public server where the Zeus slot is maybe not restricted to certain people, where you cannot count on that they're being responsible, you will have to add restrictions, you will have to add maybe resources and whatnot which are drained when using Zeus, or just for a scenario where you actually want that feature, then you're going to use it. But personally, when I use Zeus, I use it as an extra tool in addition to an originally pre-created mission in the editor. Therefore, I don't need that stuff. That's exactly why I'm not familiar with all the modules, because I don't really have time or interest to learn how they work. But either way, I'm going to show you basically where you can find some information about the use of those modules, and I'm going to show you how to enable two of the modules as examples. The only help that is coming from BIS when it comes to mission editing with Zeus is the hide info or show info section and the editor creation window, as you just saw in the footage. So clicking on that button will basically show you a small image with the icons and somewhat of the combination of modules and how they're being synchronized. So if you intend to use a Zeus module for a mission, or any module in the editor for that matter, just click on the show info button on the lower right corner of the modules creation window, and then you will see a picture that shows you what modules are required, what other assets and entities are required, and how they're connected or synchronized with each other. The two Zeus modules I'm going to show you here is the restrict editing area around player module and the add editable object module. Both models are pretty easy to use, but again, they're not absolutely required for your missions. You can use them, but you don't have to. Select F7 and double click on the map to bring up the module creation window, select category and then module, and select add editable objects from the list. Important is to assign a Zeus, so whoever is assigned as Zeus is the owner of the Game Master module, can be written in there, and then you can also synchronize it to the Game Master module. To add any object that you have created in the editor into the Zeus user interface and make it interactable once the mission is running, you will have to sync that object, that unit, that character, that vehicle, or whatever the hell you have placed in the editor with a particular add editable object module. So what I've done now is synchronized all the player slots really with the add editable objects module, and then that with the Game Master module. So therefore, when I start the mission and go into Zeus interface, I will have the blue markers over the units or the player markers and whatnot, and it becomes interactable in the Zeus UI. If it's an AI unit, for example, I can give it waypoints afterwards. If it's an empty vehicle, I can move it around, place it somewhere else, I can delete it, I can change the parameters on it, and the same goes for other empty objects. You can place multiple of those modules anywhere in the mission. This becomes handy when you have like a main base and two AOs somewhat far away from each other on the map. You don't have to synchronize desired objects all across the map with the add editable objects module. You can then place one of those modules per AO as well as one for the base, and then synchronize the objects or units you want to be interactable via Zeus with the add editable object module in that area, and then just synchronize that module once with the Game Master module. That's going to make your life a lot easier when creating the mission. Again, to make sure it's clear for everyone, you do not have to make every single object or entity you created in the editor interactable from the Zeus UI by using this particular module, but it can become in handy for certain objects or certain vehicles and whatnot. Created entities from the editor which are not synchronized to one of those modules will still be in the mission, they will still be there, but you cannot work with them. In the footage you see now, you can identify the players, or basically the units controlled by humans, with the red circle around their name as well as their game profile name. You see them, they move around and whatnot, but you cannot interact with them. You cannot like drop them somewhere else and whatnot. That's not possible. The AI units you see standing around there have been created in the editor and then synchronized to one of those modules, so therefore they are interactable via Zeus. I can also give them waypoints and whatnot, as long as they're not controlled by a human. As soon as an actual player joins the mission and takes over that slot and that unit, it will be displayed as any other player. Bad news about this module though is that it doesn't seem to be working quite well with join in progress missions, so MSO missions on the public server and whatnot. There the Zeus interface is having issues to detect players when the mission is running for a few hours already, so join in progress. But operations where everybody meets basically in the game lobby and then starts the mission at the same time should not create a problem. The second module I'm going to show you is the restrict editing around players module. With this you can add an area around each player or just a team leader of a group in which you as Zeus are not able to spawn enemies or anything like that. So it's basically like a safe zone, so the players know, okay, Zeus is not going to be able to spawn a tank right in front of me or something similar. Simply place the module in the editor, assign a Zeus or synchronize to the Game Master module, set the radius of this restricted area, and if a restricted area is supposed to be created around every player or just group leaders. And that's already everything you have to do. When playing the mission as Zeus, the restrict editing area will be displayed with those blue vertical bars, if you will. And depending on how you have set up the module as shown before, you will have one of those circles around every single player or just group leaders. The area will always move around with the players as they move around the mission, and you can also see in the map view indicated by the black dots. If I try to spawn something in the restricted area, you see the cursor is marked with a non-spawn icon, and therefore it's not possible. As soon as I move the cursor outside of the restricted area, I can spawn things, but I can also not drag and drop them into the restricted area, so it's completely locked. The only thing that works really is using the Zeus lightning bolt. So if I want to destroy something near the players or the players themselves, or just give them a good scare, I can still do that. In my opinion, the sole purpose of this module is to basically protect the players from Zeus. So therefore, again, in a public server where you might have an idiot controlling Zeus and engaging players, this is definitely necessary. But on a community operation where the guy who is controlling Zeus is actually a good curator, this feature will be unnecessary. Alright, those are the only two modules I'm going to show you in this video. Again, there's not a lot of information available online, and the only help BIS gives you is when clicking on the show info button on the module creation window in the editor. This should give you an idea of what modules, entities, empty objects or triggers you will have to use for a module to work, and then it's just trying. Alright people, this is the end of my tutorial about mission editing with Zeus. I know I've probably not been able to deliver what you guys have been expecting from me. Should that be the case, sorry you feel that way. But yeah, with everything I have on my plate with producing for 2 channels and leading community, I have a full-time job on the side. I just don't have the time anymore to spend countless of hours in the editor just writing things out and doing research online. Nevertheless, I hope I was able to give you some pointers, some tips on how to work with those modules. I think the most important part is covered, and this is how to actually enable Zeus for a particular slot, or on a dedicated server where you want to add restrictions, how to use the user IDs. Those are also the 2 features I personally use the most. For community operations, there's no need for additional coding. God mode is usually good if you have a reasonable guy in the Zeus position. Same goes for the public server. If the Zeus slot is locked to specific people who you know will act responsibly, there's no need to add editing restriction areas or costs for resources and whatnot. The YouTube footage you see right here is recorded on a community operation of the 161st VSOR. I was acting as curator in Zeus and basically editing the mission on the fly. It is, in my opinion, a good example of how to use Zeus as an enhancement for a pre-created mission. So the mission itself is somewhat pre-created. I have spawned a lot of the enemies already in the editor, and there are a bunch of scripts running in the background. For example, a revive script which has nothing to do with Zeus, so you're not forced to use the Zeus respawn. You can basically create your missions as you're probably used to. You can create a lot of stuff in the editor, you can enable scripts and whatnot, and then simply give access to Zeus to a particular person which can curate the mission and influence it on the fly. So if you're interested, have a look at this video. It's linked in the description below, as well as on the end of this particular video right here. I'm also going to link a few channels of other YouTubers who have made some tutorials about the use of modules, of Zeus modules particularly. Yeah, check those out if you want to have a visualized version of the use of some other modules which you don't get from the show info button on the module creation window. Alright, that's the end of this video. Thanks a lot for watching. Please stay tuned for the 4th and for now last video of the series. There I'm going to focus on the Add CPM mod, the Curated Presets mod, which gives you some extra functionality, some extra features and fun stuff to use as Zeus. I'm Zeus Maverick, and I'll see you soon. Because there is not a lot of information available online. It's really hard to find some, and quite frankly I don't have time to spend hours or even weeks on learning things myself. I'm going to show you some of the very basic features which are, in my opinion, somewhat important to actually use Zeus in a mission that you want to be completely generated via Zeus, or just use Zeus as a tool in a mission that you have created in the editor with scripts and everything you're probably used to. In the very first video I already showed you how to set up Zeus basically in God mode. Hey, what's going on guys? Swiss Maverick here with the third tutorial of the series. In this video I'm going to focus on mission editing. As announced in the previous two videos, I'm just going to go over the very basics of mission editing. In the first chapter I'm going to show you how to enable Zeus for a player who's going to be able to toggle in and out of the Zeus interface at any time during the mission, or the game logic version where a special Zeus slot is created. The player version is what I've shown you in the first video and used in the second one. This is where you create an infantry unit which is selected as playable and therefore become a player slot in the multiplayer mission lobby. Here again it's important to name the unit, as example here Zeus, and then use that exact name when defining the owner in the Zeus module. Also important here is to disable the force interface option in the Game Master module, otherwise you will not be able to toggle in and out of the Zeus interface, which defeats the whole purpose of this version where you have a playable slot. Writing next to the name of the unit in the editor also a description will help you identify the proper slot here in the multiplayer mission lobby. Since we have not added any special restrictions, which will be covered later in the video, anyone who's going to join that, where you have access to pretty much all its features, therefore can create the mission on the fly without any restrictions or having to worry about limited resources and whatnot. This is also how I personally use Zeus when I create missions for my community. It's also how we run it on our public server. When using Zeus on an open server though, it's really important to restrict access, because otherwise everyone is able to use those tools, those features, and can pretty much mess up your server. Alright, I'm going to go to the mission editor now and show you some of the very basic features.